Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. I'm Matt Richards, and in this episode, I have a conversation with Ness Wilson of Open Heaven Church and also leader of Pioneer UK. We talk about a lot of things between church planning, women in leadership, and just working with other churches in the community. It's a great conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. So sit back, enjoy the watch or the listen, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, Ness, thanks for joining me again.
No problem.
Yeah. Now, we've had a conversation before, and you've been leading Open Heaven Church in one form of leadership since 93. You were one of the founding, I guess, people of Open Heaven Church.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
About the journey of how it started?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it started really when I turned up to university in 1990, and all the second and third year Christians in my hall of residence had been praying specifically for 10 fired up freshers. 10 of us turned up. We'd done missions in the summer. We're keen to be used by God. And we just prayed. We just prayed every which way we knew how. And I remember getting up at ridiculous times in the middle of the night to go around and lay hands on everyone's doors, and we prayed up and down. It was 21-story tower block, prayed up and down in the lifts, and something happened, and something beautiful happened, and there was a move of God in that hall of residence. So week 5, a friend came into my room and said, "Ness, how do I become a Christian?" So kind of fumbled my way through that and led her to Jesus. And then week 10, 2 more friends came into my room and said, "Ness, how do I become a Christian?" And that was happening all over the hall. So the number of Christians trebled in 10 weeks. And there was healings, some quite remarkable healings. One guy who was who was a rugby player and sports sec and had this big eye injury. And we prayed, and all the swelling completely disappeared, all the discoloration disappeared, and news got out. And so at the end of that term, we'd had this 10 weeks of like, wow, God just really breaking out in our hall. And then at the end of the term, we went on a Christian Union weekend away, and the speaker, a guy called Roger Ellis, had just been to a conference, and somebody had prophesied and said to him, "You're about to meet a group of young people, and they're going to plant a church for young people, and it will be in the Midlands." And that's where we were, in the Midlands. We were young people at the time. And we really found ourselves I think, hearts just leaping at the thought that God might be doing something with us that was beyond that moment. And so we began to scheme and dream and whisper the word church planting and what could that mean. And we got connected to Pioneer at that point, so even before we planted, and just began to, I guess, just think a little bit outside the box. What could a church look like that was particularly relevant to our generation and to our friends? And so then when we graduated in the summer of 93, a bunch of us rented a house that had a very big lounge, and we started church like that, very organic, very raw. We started with breakfast together, and then just shared what God was doing in our lives, worshipped in a very organic way. And it was a humble start, and God was very kind to us, and it's been a privilege. I wouldn't have wanted to have done anything else with my life.
Have you, starting so organically, have you really noticed the markers throughout the times and throughout the years? Like Joshua set up those markers to remind the children of Israel where they'd come from and when they crossed the Jordan. Have you noticed those markers, and have those been kind of like bookmarks in the history of the church and really kind of set the foundation of where we're going to go from this point on, and then just we haven't moved backwards at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think, in those early years, we were very aware, I think, of what we were sowing into the DNA of the church is what we would reproduce in the years to come. So we had a mantra in those early years: openness, honesty, and accountability, a really strong emphasis on discipleship. really wanting to give permission to speak into each other's lives. And that has meant we've created a discipleship culture that has lasted even now, nearly 30 years in, where it's normal practice for one-to-one discipleship to be happening within our church community. I think we just, there were different markers along the way. The first few years are obviously the sort of establishing, you're in the church planting phase, and then we got to a point probably about 4 or 5 years in of realizing, no, we're not just a church plant anymore. We are a church, and this thing is going to last. And we knew that we had within us, we knew there was a call to also reproduce and to send church plants out. So about, I think it was maybe about 15 years in, we sent our first cross-cultural church planting team out. We planted kind of more locally, so we ended up in 2 expressions of Open Heaven within Loughborough, but we also knew there was something in us about church planting further afield. So a team was formed to go to France, which we knew was a tough place to plant a church. But we went to a university town called Annecy and planted, and there's a vibrant church there now. And then 5 years ago, we sent a team to Anglesey, North Wales. And again, there's a vibrant church there. I was just there this last weekend. And interestingly, both those churches are bilingual. So they've done a really good job of honouring the culture they've gone into. And that whole thing, I think, we've said to both the teams, like we had as Open Heaven in the early days, a blank page. Create an expression of church that's going to really fit for the context that God's put you in, make it mission shaped. And so both of those church plants are doing that. And then another marker along the way, it was 10 years ago. So we'd been pretty nomadic and had kind of rented every space in the town. We were in a lounge, and then we went to the cheapest place in the town, which was an old scout hut. And then we went to a primary school hall, and then secondary school halls, and then an art college, the university. We've kind of been all over. But about 10 years ago, the story really was when Rich and I first got married, we lived opposite an old Anglican church, Church of England. And it saddened me that there was a little dwindling congregation in what was called the side chapel. And there was this huge, great big building, and it was in the sort of student area of the town. And I used to walk past it every day, and I just would pray, God, bring this building back to life, bring this building back to life, honestly thinking I was praying for renewal in the Anglican church. Anyway, that didn't happen, and the church then closed. The official terminology here is the church was made redundant. But because of the unity movement in the town, I was privileged to be part of something very beautiful amongst the leaders, where we began to talk about there's one church of Loughborough with multiple expressions. And the leader of the Anglican sort of the diocese made a brilliant decision not to sell the land and the building commercially, but to offer it to the rest of the churches in the town. And wow. Ourselves and the Elim congregation, who actually we'd been using the Elim building for everything midweek, and I had a really good friendship with the Elim leader. We just began to think, what would it look like if we could do a building share, kind of to put our money in together, because we knew it was going to be an expensive project. Is it possible for 2 churches to share a building, and so that it would be full of activity, all day, every day? We knew it was risky. We had some people warn us against it, that's too risky. Don't get involved. Don't put your money into the same building. But I think I've always wanted to operate. If I've got a choice between cynicism or naivety, I'd always rather go for naivety. And, and so we said to our church, we've been this nomadic people for 20 years, but perhaps it's time to actually really invest and kind of put some markers in the ground. And I loved the idea that we were going to do that in a kingdom partnership, so that there was no way in which the building was going to cause us to settle, because the way we were doing it was quite radical. It was it's a kingdom resource in kingdom hands, and it's not going to, in one sense, we're not owning it because it's shared. So we did, and it was a huge faith journey. I mean, we'd never had to raise that kind of money. And I remember, it ended up being £1.7 million to
Wow.
refurb this building. We had to put 2 floors in, but in the first few weeks of our fundraising campaign, we had a couple come and say to me and Rich, can we just come for a cup of tea? And I was like, yeah, great. The wife was someone who'd become a Christian at Open Heaven. I discipled her a little bit, and she had got married and gone to London. We didn't know the husband. They came into our lounge. We gave them a cup of tea, very British thing to do. And they just said, we believe that God's asked us to give you £100,000. We were like, oh my gosh, that kind of thing had never happened to us before. And that was a real faith booster in terms of like, wow, God, you're in this, because we had to win some philosophical arguments really with our church community, even about owning a building, because we had been this sort of pretty fluid. But it's been a real blessing. And so actually this year, we're both 30 years old as a church and also 10 years since we moved into the building that we still call St. Peter's, because it's just sort of honouring the name of the past. But it's just, it's really good. So it's 2 congregations, 2 churches, and the Elim Church are absolutely fantastic, and they do loads of stuff that we don't do, and we do loads of stuff that they don't do. So
yeah, that's very cool to be able to share a space like that in, different denomination or different, doctrine beliefs, but be able to have that unity to be able to say we can take care of our congregation, but we can also take care of our community from the same spot and not step on each other's toes or, getting in each other's way, just to work together. And I think that's the whole part of Acts. As we look, they were selling their belongings and just, they're doing what they needed to do to take care of it. And you're reclaiming something that was going to be lost. You're going to reclaim something that was going to be torn down, maybe.
Exactly. And I always felt a bit grieved because this particular leader of this particular Anglican church had, from my perspective, kind of gone way off track and was allowing like Druid ceremonies in the building and really, I mean, honestly, so there was a part of me as well that almost felt like I felt kind of indignant that a building that the saints before us had sacrificed. Initially it was a mission hut and then it became a church building, and I just felt like this was made to be a place of worship and preaching the gospel of Jesus. And so there was something in me, almost felt like, I want to take this back. I want to push back.
Yeah, you're redeeming it.
Yeah, I want to redeem it. That's exactly right. That's what I felt. We want to redeem this land and redeem this building. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. I know where you're coming from. We've been, I think it's 10 years today that we started our church. And, well, not today. No, we've got a couple months. Sorry, I've lost track. But we know what it's like to be nomadic. We were in the library meeting room, and then we went to the school. And then during COVID, they shut the school down. So we're in a secondary, hall, which could barely fit 35 people comfortably. But we were cramming, 60 people in there, and just a foot section of row so they could squeeze in there. But yeah, there's something when God solidifies something and puts that foot down where you put the foundation down, and it's like, okay, we have a place to rest now. And I think it's the same way with the children of Israel. They wandered and finally come into a place of promise where they can be fruitful, they can multiply, and they can subdue the land and take what God has called them to take. So that's just an awesome story. I really love that. It's just so cool to see, from wandering to a place where you can share it with another church completely. And that's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
So Ness, we're going to talk about Pioneer just a little bit. Can you kind of give us a little bit of your history with Pioneer? I know Open Heaven started really quickly with Pioneer in 93, which was, they were about 10 years, 12 years old at the time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So we joined Pioneer, and to be honest, it was so exciting and refreshing. I'd never seen anything quite like it, but I loved it. It was I mean, radical can be an overused word, but it was so creative. It was so prophetic. There were things that how people were living out their discipleship of Jesus was quite incredible. I remember going to visit the home of Steve Clifford, who has ended up being our apostolic oversight for all those years. And going to his home and realizing he lived in like a community household. So it was him, his wife, his kids, but then other people. And the way that it wasn't just like lodgers. These were people, they were eating together, sharing life together. And that showed me a model of household that Rich and I then adopted. And we've had about 25 different people who've lived with us over the years. And all of that, it's all part of discipleship, where we are... sharing life together. And I saw women, like I'd never seen women operating in they were so obviously content to be a woman. There was no sense of trying to be men, but so obviously content to be leaders. And women operating at every level of leadership. It was like, female church planters, female apostles, really inspirational. So I loved that. And I think it just opened up my eyes as to, wow, this is a network that's full of life. It's full of, it was kind of like Gerald used to talk about non-religious Christianity, and he hated anything that would kind of put people in a box or, there'd just be kind of empty ritual without that living, vibrant, spirit-filled relationship with Jesus. Yeah. And at times he was quite controversial, and he did upset some people in those early days. But we kind of lived in the good of it, really. There was such freedom, and it felt really, really spirit-led. So I loved it. I just felt like I'd come to just an oasis of some clear water that I was just lapping up. It was really wonderful.
Yeah. And I think what you said, Gerald pushed some buttons on people, and I think any move of God will offend people. Yeah. People who have a religious mindset, people who are used to, that's these new songs, this new style of church. Yeah. I heard someone say, they're like, oh, this new stuff. He goes, well, the songs you sing were new once too. So we have to be open to change. The hymns were once, Wesley's hymns and were once, brand new songs, and people probably rejected them. And now, people reject in modern worship and say, well, it's not the hymns, but it was still new. And so I think Pioneer, because it is so creative, you look at that, I just saw a post today about the nature, helping preserve nature and helping restore what God has created. It's those boundaries that sometimes, it's those things that push the boundaries that sometimes people don't understand, and they become indignant to it or just afraid of it. But I think those move of God's need to happen, and eventually they will become accepted. It's not the status quo at that time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And it attracted lots of kind of creatives, musicians. So, Delirious came out of a Pioneer church, and Noel Richards, and different. There was just a lot of life, and I learned so much. I learned so much about effective evangelism, about prayer, about spiritual warfare. I just felt like I was a sponge absorbing it all. Mm-hmm. So really appreciative to have just and little did I know at the time, it was probably one of the only new church networks that actually was promoting women in leadership. So I kind of stumbled into something that, as a single female church planter, I wouldn't have been given the backing and the space in other networks. But it's only looking back that I recognize that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Stumbled upon it. And that's kind of the same way we did too. We kind of stumbled upon it, and it was like, my word, this is refreshing. This is something that, I think when you find what God has called you to be part of, it's like an oasis, and it's like, wow, I couldn't believe this is here. And why did I not find this sooner? Walking around for so long that I didn't see it. But so, you started out as a college student in a pioneer church, or,
Yeah.
your church was part of a pioneer
Yeah.
move. So as your church grew, and now you being the leader of Pioneer Midlands, where did your leadership role in Pioneer start?
Um, well, I found myself pretty early on, Gerald asking me to go onto the national leadership team, which baffled me. But I always have had a kind of principle, I think, of anytime something slightly scares you, say yes to it. I just, I knew that if I kind of was able to embrace the fear and do it anyway, I knew that I would grow. I've had an
Yeah.
appetite to be a kind of a lifelong learner, so I knew even though this was well out of my comfort zone, and it was pretty intimidating. Yeah, so Gerald asked me fairly early on to be on the team, and yeah, I mean, I really, I think I felt so privileged to sit amongst these heroes of the faith, these men and women of great stature, and yeah, it was a real privilege, and then so even though I planted as a single woman, I then did end up getting married to Ness Wilson, who heads up Fusion, and so then when it was our first child coming along, I then came off the team and just knew I wanted to just go back to being kind of more local. It was kind of plenty enough, really, to raise a growing family and to be leading a local church. So I had a season really of much more local focused, and trusting God in that. There's something I think often for women in leadership where our leadership journey often runs in seasons, and it's quite a deep exercise in trust. Often, if you know that there's a gifting in you and something of a calling, which is actually perhaps wider and broader, you just know there's something in you where you're going to be able to serve and strengthen wider than your own local church. But for different seasons, you have to just kind of like stay put. So, yeah, so I did that. And then, as then our youngest started school, then felt kind of more able to give of myself wider again. So went back onto the team. So was on Billy's team, and then we started to talk a bit about regions, and I took on Pioneer Midlands, and that was really good. That was a good stretch. That was just beginning to gather leaders together, have leaders days, begin to work into other churches. And then it was 2019 as the shape of Pioneer was changing, and opportunities were opening up for Billy and like yourselves, churches kind of from other nations were getting connected in. So then Billy stepped up into international leader, and I stepped up into the UK leader. And very similar to that, going right back to when Steve Clifford said to me, "You need to be the team leader of Open Heaven." All the way through to every opportunity, I had that mix of feeling both, wow, a kind of a little bit daunted by the task, and yet at the same time feeling absolutely called to do it, and that somehow God would equip me as I stepped up, which
That's really
I
cool.
think He's doing.
Well, you know what? It's going from, a regional leader to overseeing the UK is a lot of churches, a lot of responsibility, a lot of other leaders that are, checking in with you, reporting to you. So, I mean, I don't think God is going to bring you into a position and not give you the equipping and leave you ill prepared to do that. There's going to be times where we lean into Him for that wisdom and lean into Him for the guidance, but I think He's never just going to, I'll just throw them in there for the fun of it to see how they flounder or whatever. So I think God's going to give you the equipping and the wisdom you need during that time to tap into what He's called you to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So one of the things that pioneers, kind of distinctive is promoting women in leadership.
Yeah.
You know, in my life, my wife is a very strong leader. She's always led a lot of areas. Like in our life, the church is split down the middle for, you know, I help lead, you know, the worship area, the tech, you know, all of the social media stuff, where she's leading the children's and the youth and the, you know, and the prophetic. So we share those responsibilities,
Yeah.
but as a woman leader, that's unheard of.
Right.
So, you know, in your life, how has your response been to, or from people, excuse me, from when you say, oh yeah, I lead a church? What has been their normal response in the beginning?
Oh, I mean, in the beginning, it was hard because I didn't fit any of the stereotypes. So I remember the very first, when we planted, I thought it was really important to build a relationship up with the other leaders in the town. So one of the first things I did was invite different ones to come to dinner, thinking, you know, everything is based on relationship and trust. And that was a really good move and something I recommend to other church planters. And so I got to know the person who was the chair of the then sort of what was called the Ministers' Fellowship. And he kindly invited me along to go to the next one. But unfortunately, the one that I went to, he was away and he had forgotten to pass on to the others that I was coming. So when I arrived, it was in a church building. There was a circle of chairs at the end of the hall. And they were all men. And as I walked through the door and started to head towards this circle of chairs, the oldest man in the group got up and came towards me and said, "I'm sorry, this is a minister's fellowship." And I said, "I know, I've actually been invited to come to this by the chair, but you know, he's obviously away today." And he said, "No, I'm sorry, my dear, you misunderstand me. This is a meeting for your minister." And I was like, "I know, I am actually here as," you know, we don't use the term minister, but church leader. And we went backwards and forwards. And as graciously as I could, I said, "I really don't want to leave, because if I leave, it's going to be really hard to come back again. And it's really important to me that we are connected to what God is doing across the church in the town and not isolated." Anyway, he let me stay, but unbelievably, everyone's Bibles were open and you couldn't write it. The topic of conversation was the Jezebel spirit. So I just didn't know what to say. And so I kept quiet for most of that. But then at the very end, what was actually really interesting was one of the youngest of the leaders, right at the end, came up to me and said, I'm really sorry for, you know, how you were treated at the start. And I really hope you come back again. And anyway, I did. And one of the things I felt God say to me right back in those early days was, what's really important in this particular season is to keep my heart soft. And I actually felt like I needed a supernatural reservoir of grace in those early days, because, you know, I had one person in a meeting say they were embarrassed because they were in a meeting where a woman was present amongst the leadership. I would get letters, you know, dear, you know, to Ness and your wife. You know, I had all kinds of like, just people, it was outside the box. But I felt like it was important to not to harden my heart, but to kind of understand, you know, kind of where people were coming from. But then it all kind of, time goes on, doesn't it? And I think if you just plug away, and people actually see the anointing of God on your life, they see health, they see growth, they see life. Eventually what ended up happening was I ended up becoming the chair of that ministers' fellowship, of that townwide unity group, and did that for 6 years, and that was great. And by then things had changed, and of course by then I wasn't the only woman. So now in the UK, certainly like in the town of Loughborough, 50% of church leaders would be women. So it's a very different picture to how it used to be in the early 90s. So I mean, still, I guess I'm still in different settings where the majority would be men, but I think when you've kind of plugged away for 30 years and there's a track record, it will oftentimes kind of make a way for it does create space for people to,
Yeah.
take you seriously. But Rich and I have had to do a kind of an interesting dance at times because, so I've always been the sort of the team leader, and there's been times he's been on the leadership team, times he's been off the leadership team. Now he's got a ministry called Fusion, and I have sometimes served at Fusion conferences and different things, but sometimes if we go into a setting and people don't know us and they will talk to Rich about the church and he steps back and said, no, my wife leads the church. And then sometimes people come up to me and talk to me about Fusion. I say, no, my husband leads Fusion. So we've just learnt to have to do that over the years, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I see that a lot. In the US, it's quite different here. Women leadership is few and far between. I only know of one other church in our state that it really does have a woman as an apostolic leader of the church, and my wife has made contact with her. But I think for years it was they tried to use scripture to beat up people for believing that way. But I've watched, and my wife handles it with grace. She went to a pro-life pastors leaders kind of meeting where they were giving more information out, and they had called and said, "Hey, can we talk to the pastor?" And my wife and they said, "Pastor Matt." She's like, "Nobody calls me that." So she's like, she knew it was either somebody selling something or somebody who wanted something. And she's like, "How can I help you?" "Well, I need to talk to the pastor or just one of the church leaders." She's like, "I am. But and she goes, "I'll be coming to this event, but will your husband be coming to this event?" She's like, "No, he works outside of the home. He works a full-time job. He will not be coming." And then, "But will your husband be coming?" It's like, it was just, they couldn't wrap their head around, oh my gosh, this woman leads in so many ways. But she went there and she saw some people she knew, and she just, she sat down, and some people were accepting of her, some people weren't. But I said to her, I'm going to keep sending you to these things because you're available to go to them. But also I want them to see that you can lead just as well as anybody else. Yeah. Just because you are a different gender doesn't mean that you can't lead. And I said, we're going to have to change the mindset of the people around us. And our church has changed. Our churches, when my wife got attacked, "Oh, she's a woman leader, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Well, it's time to stand up for her." And people stood up for her and said, "Hey, this is just because she's a woman doesn't change a calling that God has placed on her."
Yeah, that's right.
And so there is a cultural shift I think is starting to happen. That the UK did 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or whatever. And I think it started to happen 5 or 6 years ago here, 10 years ago maybe. But I think we've got strides to go before we see the expression of, man and woman as leaders in a church, and not be afraid to go, "Well, where's the pastor's wife?" Where's, and in our country, they have the pastor and then the pastor's wife. It's pastor this and his wife, so it's a very common thing. And so breaking through barriers as you did, it's probably not easy sometimes, some of the harsh comments and the negative things that get said, but how did you deal with some of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the basic stuff, really, of forgiveness. I think I was, hurt by some things that were said, and just I had to just come back again and again of God. I need to be able to forgive some of these things that were unthinking, were clumsy, but also I remember walking to different meetings and actually saying, "Father, I need to hear your voice louder in my head than the voice of some of these others that I'm going to be sitting in a meeting with." And actually, as I walked to meetings, I specifically was asking that, that sense of the Father's calling over my life into leadership, which I absolutely knew. I knew from when I was 15 years old. And it really helped me kind of just allowing that again, just the Father's voice to be the loudest, strongest voice, affirming my calling and yeah, so it kind of that was a little discipline. And then when I would get back, sometimes with some of my friends, some of my local team, I'd say, I used to have a phrase, just dust me down, because I've been in an environment where it's been pretty kind of, unfriendly. And so I
Yeah,
just dust me down. And so I'd get my teammates just to pray for me.
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think what would your words of wisdom to be to women in leadership that are just starting out, whether it's leading a ministry, a youth group, children's area, whatever it is that started out as in a church, whatever they're doing, what would your advice be to them?
I think I would say that certainly for me, that there was something about recognizing the best way I can glorify God is to step up and be the fullest version of the anointed and called leader that he wants me to be. Nobody
Mm,
wins if I diminish myself and I
yeah,
hold back. I don't find my voice. I come under intimidation. That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help the people that I'm serving. And so in
yeah,
order actually to be the best gift that I can be, to really serve people well, I need to step up, get over my internal barriers and battles and step up, because that glorifies God and it serves the church well. So that kind of helped me. And then that whole thing, I mean, again, in the early days, I read a quote from a female theologian that said, it's not about gaining equal rights, it's about gaining equal rights to serve. And that really settled something in me, because I thought, all I'm asking is that I'm able to lay my life down and give of my time, effort, energy for others in the same way that my male counterparts are able to do. And so
yeah,
understanding the whole thing about authority is never to lord it over others. It's always authority to serve. That really helped me step into my God-given authority, as a woman. So yeah, they were some of the things that I learned. And I think now, just recognizing every time a woman steps up, she's creating then space for others behind her to step up.
yeah.
And so that
That's
motivates me
good.
as well, because I think we
Yeah,
all become who the most important people in our lives think we can become. And it's often said that if somebody, in authority sees leadership in you before 18 and says you are a leader, you're called and anointed by God to be a leader, then that's often when you see a pipeline of younger leaders. So I think it's actually really important for women who are a bit further on in their life journey, as we step up, as we create space, we create the role models. And so I'm passionate about certainly looking at younger women behind me, and when I see leadership potential, speaking it over them, and creating that space for them.
that's really good. That's really good. I like that. Yeah, I like what you said. Just you see that in them at a young age, and then calling
Yeah,
it out in them, and imparting things to them, and
yeah,
discipling them, and things like
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
um, now I know Pioneer has a lot of women in leadership and women apostolic leaders. What are some of the different opportunities that churches and leaders in Pioneer have for different training, especially for women? I know they have their annual women's conference, but
Yeah.
they also have, am I correct, is a women's leadership conference also? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So every year we have a women leaders conference. So we had that just a few weeks ago. Had 150 women, which was really good. So women leading in church. We had a speaker called Henrietta Blythe, who's the CEO of Open Doors, so working into the persecuted church. So she, my goodness, had stories of bravery and courage of women who were not compromising, were not denouncing their faith in Jesus and paying a high price for that.
Mm,
We again, we had female worship leaders that were leading us in worship. Women speaking, hosting. It was a really powerful time where women were equipped and empowered to keep growing, keep growing in their gift. And then we also have women leaders learning communities. So there's a smaller groups, kind of 6 to 8 women who gather together, often senior leaders kind of gathering together nowadays, sometimes on Zoom, sometimes in person. And we've got a model, we call it Partners in Adversity. And that whole thing of when we come together, actually talking about the thing that is causing us the greatest challenge. And it's got to be kind of leadership related and something that we're able to do something about. But we present that to each other, and then we kind of, we hear the wisdom in the room. And process it and be able to then pray and prophesy over each other. So that works really well.
Yeah,
and then
good.
just a lot of mentoring, really encouraging younger women to find the mentors around them, which we can do now, because now there's enough women. Again, back in the early days, I remember, where's the mentors? Where's the mothers? And I remember I just remember Father God saying to me, you're just going to have to be it.
Yeah.
Where are the mothers? And God was like, you've got to be the mother.
Yeah. No, that's what my wife and I were talking about a couple months ago. We're like, man, we were so young, and we were like, 24, 25, running our own ministry, and 50 kids sitting in our garage on a weekly basis. And we're like, we needed mothers and fathers. And we're like, where are we going to find mothers and fathers? And years, and people are like, just talk to this other church leader. I'm like, no, I need somebody who's done this. I need somebody who's taught this kind of stuff. And coming into Pioneer, we're starting to get that. It may not be mothers and fathers per se, but it's apostolic leaders, it's brothers and sisters that have done it in greater ways, and for us to be able to glean from that. So I can completely understand. It's like, we're like, where are the mothers and fathers? We need them. And, and God just said, you have to do it. You're going to have to, that's what Pioneer does, is you have to make that pathway for people to come into what you wanted. You have to create that for them. So
that's right.
I think that's key just for, women in leadership. Again, I'm not a woman, so I can only express what my wife has expressed to me, but I've seen some of the pain in her heart when things have gone awry and people have attacked her. But I felt like, we could try to defend her. We could try to say something, but I'm like, I think God's going to take care of it. And I think every argument that's come against her has kind of just blown away like chaff. And I've just realized that we can try to, like you, Linda, trying to help women leader, but I think us as men need to talk more about women in leadership on a regular basis. And I think we need to start to change. Like, I know there's more things in my heart that I can change towards promoting my wife into leadership. I know there's things that I probably need to get rid of because of, cultural things, but I think as men, we should start to promote women into the roles that we see are open. But it's always been in our culture, it's always been the man's the pastor, like I said before, and the wife is the wife. And so just breaking through that mindset of, we have to promote these women into the leadership position, because my wife, there's no way I could lead the prophetic like she leads the prophetic. I'm like, she's like telling me things, and I'm like, wow, I learned something new. I learned something new every time I talk to her about the prophetic. So it's like, it blows me away what God, especially when you partner together. When we partner together, we're unstoppable, because God is using gifts from both sides. And so I just think if we can have more men in leadership promoting and talking about women in leadership and talking about why we need women in leadership, I think it will help our cause as a church. It will help the discipleship, and it will bring up more women leaders. It'll get these young teen girls, by the time they're 19, 20, being able to lead in the church instead of waiting till they're 35, 40, and then going, I guess you do have a gift. Now we can do something with it. So
that's right.
I just, that's my heart is, I think we'll see Pioneer grow. I think we'll see
Yeah.
the culture of women in leadership grow when we start to do that, and we start to change our minds and start to promote it
Yeah.
in a greater way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think, and that's I think one of the really refreshing things about Pioneer is, so like Steve Clifford, who's overseen us, he opened doors for me in all kinds of different. I was getting invites to speak at conferences, and I knew it had come from Steve, and then Billy being so releasing, and
Yeah.
and inviting me to step up and lead Pioneer UK, but you're right as well about the husband's role, because I think what I've seen, there's a lot of men who really verbally will promote, yeah, we believe in women in leadership, but it's a much harder thing to pay the personal cost of being married to a female leader. But that, like I feel so privileged to be married to Rich. Even when we got married, he wrote a sort of a line in our wedding vows about, it's the call of God on my life to release Ness into the full gifting of what God has called her into. And
That's
so
good.
what that means is, so for example, in terms of having children and raising a family, the practical implications of, him having reduced working hours and having flexible workload, so he can do some of the school runs and different things like that. Or, over the years, I feel like I've experienced what it is to have someone who's been able to put, any sense of personal ambition has kind of, laid ego to rest in order to see me be released to do different things, even if it means he's picked up actually quite a lot of some of the household chores at different times. But that's a real blessing, and I kind of think that's really what it means for a man to say they want to promote women in leadership. It does mean a personal cost on the home front. So I think that's wonderful what you're saying.
I just, because I have two daughters. One's 19 and married, and the other one's 16 and getting ready to graduate. And I look at, they're firecrackers. They're both very strong, very opinionated in some ways, but I'm like, they were not born this way to be pew sitters and to sit behind their husband and to do that. God has given them wisdom. God has given them the ability to lead. I look at my youngest, and she just has the influence, and she's not willing to stop and compromise anything. And I'm like, that right there is a future leader. And it may not be the church, but it may be a ministry. It might be the workplace, but she's powerful, and she understands that her identity. And I think we need to start to speak into their identities at a young age of who God has called them to be. And that's boys and girls. But when we really look at, if we're going to promote women in leadership, we need to start to have these things at 10 years old, 8 years old, so they can understand that God has called them, instead of waiting till, they're in a certain age. And I'm like, I pray that my daughters, and, my daughter's husband and my other daughter's boyfriend, they understand how powerful they are, and they are compassionate with them, and they are promoting them, and they're there to walk with them, because I know my girls are called. They have very much the same calling my wife has on them in the prophetic, and I'm like, we need to we learn to facilitate that at a young age, and try to facilitate that so they can lead. And it could, and it may not be a church. They may just be leading their home in the prophetic and leading their family in the prophetic, but giving them the opportunity the same as we would, because we disciple young boys in preaching and teaching at, 14, 15 years old. They want to get up and preach, but we haven't done that for girls. And I don't know, in our culture, we haven't. We've always looked at the boys and said, okay, you want to preach, you want to teach, but I'm looking, going through my head saying, okay, this is another woman in our church that can preach. This is another woman who can lead. And I think when we open our eyes to it, and when we have, sometimes we just have to say, I was wrong, and God humbles you about that and say, okay, my gosh, I didn't realize this until our eyes were open, the women leadership. And he starts to reveal the strong qualities of women in your life and say, okay, hey, this person has the ability to lead. And there's times where I've gone to my wife and said, man, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this, because you were leading in this and I was trying to take it over thinking I have to do this. And you know, because I'm the husband, and I had to just stop and say, okay, God, she's doing a better job than I can. So why am I trying to take this over and try to do it? But just in that natural husband-like way, trying to take care of things, I can sometimes push her in a leadership way and not trying to, but, you know, sometimes push her and make her feel like don't want her to lead something or don't want her to be in charge of something. I'm like, no, I just want to take care of everything. I want to make sure everything's okay. So it's just having the mindset and trying to be aware of where God is saying, as husbands, back off a little bit, let your wife lead this. As fathers, teach your daughters to lead, you know? So I think we can do so much more. And it just, that one-on-one discipleship helps. I know with my wife, she has a pretty ongoing conversation with Linda Ward on a regular basis. And she's like, I'm just getting ideas and God's revealing things to me and just showing me things. And she's like, now I want to start training other women how to lead. And so I think it starts a chain reaction. Yeah, and I see a lot of things happening, not just in Pioneer, but in our society, that is finally starting to allow women the proper place and their right place alongside of men, and not saying, oh, well, you're the wife, just step back. It's, you know, what they had for so long. So, but
I think what's also really interesting is whenever you see moves of God, you always see women released. So, you know, the start of the Salvation Army, William and Catherine Booth, and William Booth famously said, some of my best men are women. Or, you know, some of the kind of Pentecostal revival, you see, it was women who were church planting and, you know, preaching the gospel, operating in power of the gifts of the Spirit. And so there's something that always seems to happen when there's moves of God, that, you know, women are right at the forefront alongside the men. And, that's exciting.
Yeah,
that's really
I'm just excited. I'm excited for what God is doing. I think there's going to be a greater move of women leadership in this next generation of you know 20 and 30 somethings in the Pioneer Network, but also within some of these revivals that are happening around the U.S. in different areas, and we're just going to start seeing some the kingdom walked out in the way that it was supposed to be.
Yeah, that's right.
So
it's good. It's exciting.
So Ness, we made it through. It took a little bit of trying on this part.
I think it might be my computer. I don't know what's going on, but
I'm not sure. And maybe next time we can try Zoom if we have to.
Okay.
So thank you so much for spending the time with me, especially twice in the same day of trying to do this. And I know your schedule has been busier than you probably need it to be. So thank you again. Great. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, really nice to chat to you and get to know you better. I've enjoyed that.
And I think we won't be at the leadership conference this year, but we're going to we're going to try to come next year, because my wife has a women's conference that she's doing on the 18th of March. So we're kind of a lot of stuff going on. So we didn't want to try to fly across the world and then fly back and get all that prepared.
I get that. You can't do everything. No, I get that.
So, well, Ness, I will let you go. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. It was good chatting with you.
No problem. You take care, and God bless.
Yeah, you too. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode. If you like this episode, share it with somebody. If you want to find out more about Pioneer or the Pioneer Podcast, you can go to pioneerpodcast.org. It has some of our core values and also links to the Pioneer Network. So, I hope you're blessed by this. We'll see you next time.